the recording, which I've just done. Good. So supply and demand is a good model to start with because it's less complicated than the ones that we're going to get to. And so it's a good one for explaining how you read the graphs and how you interpret what's going on, which is the important part of what a model is for, okay? Models are really important to economists. You probably figured that out. The reason why is because models are the principal tool that economists use to be able to understand economic events. Okay, so something happens and we use a model to tell us what the outcome is going to be. And we can certainly do that with supply and demand. And that's in fact what your homework assignment asks you to do. So let's look at examples of this. Let me see if I can find what I'm looking for. Don't know. Nope, that's not it. I got too many windows open. It's a metaphor for my life. All right. Okay. Now let me share my screen and hopefully that will help. Share is there and whiteboard this one. Okay. Can you see the graph there?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a demand curve, or the graph of a demand curve. And it's more complicated than most demand curves because it intentionally has a whole bunch of information in here to make it easy to understand, okay? The way you read this graph is really very simple. What you do is you pick a price. Say we pick $1.60 right here. Can you see where I'm circling $1.60?
Yes.
Okay, then you simply move horizontally until you hit the demand curve, and then you read down, and that looks like about 550 to me, okay? So what this says is you pick a price, and the demand curve tells you, by reading off the other axis, how much quantity of gasoline is being demanded here. Now, all of this information is actually given in the parentheses here, right? So it says when the price is $1.60 a gallon, there are 550 million gallons that are being demanded, okay? Ordinarily, you wouldn't see that information so explicitly. In fact, let me scroll back here. I believe there's another graph. Nope, it's the other way, sorry. Right here, right? So it's the same thing. Always in a demand curve, the vertical axis has the price of the product, and the horizontal axis has the quantity of whatever it is that's being demanded. And the way you read it is the same thing. You pick a price, like right here, and you go over to the demand curve, and then you read down, and that's the quantity demanded, okay? So let me stop there and ask if you have any questions about that part of the story. Sam, you good?
Yeah.
Anybody confused yet? Darn, I'll have to try harder. Okay. No, actually, believe it or not, my goal is for you not to be confused. Okay, so there are a couple things to notice about the demand curve. One thing, obviously, fairly obviously, is at lower prices, people want to buy more stuff, okay? So if we go from, say, $1.60 per gallon down to $1 per gallon, what you see is the quantity goes from 550 all the way up to 800 million gallons, okay? Every demand curve you ever see should be downward sloping from left to right. That reflects what we call the law of demand. Okay, there are, unlike the physical sciences, in the social sciences, there are relatively few laws. A law is something which is always true, right? I mean, at least it's been found to be always true. In economics, we have maybe half a dozen laws total. And the very first one is the law of demand, because this has been tested many, many, many times and always found in real life to work. There are a couple of theoretical exceptions, but you don't need to worry about those unless you go on and take more advanced courses. So you can count on demand curves being downward sloping. Again, the way you read the curve is you pick a price, you go over, and once you hit the demand curve, then you can read off what the amount, the quantity demanded that people want to buy is going to be. All right. Now, moving right along until you tell me to stop. All right, let's go look at supply. Supply works exactly the same way. Let me see if I can find the graph, right? So unlike demand curves, supply curves are upward sloping, which means at a higher price, firms are going to want to supply more because it's profitable, right? But the way you read these graphs is exactly the same. You start with a price, say $1.60. At $1.60, you go over to the supply curve, and then you read the number down, okay? So it's a little bit hard to read here, but the number is 640 million gallons. You can see that it's between 600 and 700, okay? 640 million gallons, all right? So the law of supply says that as price goes up, businesses want to supply more. And that's why supply curves always are upward sloping from left to right. Demand curves are downward sloping, supply curves are upward sloping. Okay? All right. Now, let's put them together and see what we get. All right, let me go back. All right. Let me go back to the demand curve just for a second because I want to show you something. What we've said so far is you pick a price and then the demand curve shows you how much people want to buy, or the supply curve shows you how much businesses want to sell, right? You pick a price and then you read off the curve. So my question to you is, where does the price actually come from? You understand what I'm asking?
Where does the price settle?
Yeah, where's the price settle?
Between the supply, where the supply and demand intersect.
Right, okay. The answer is...
the equilibrium.
Well, that's what we call it. But the price is determined through the interaction of demand and supply, right? How much people want to buy versus how much firms want to sell. Okay.
Okay.
Let's see. Let's go here. I think this has a good graph. All right. Okay. Here we have demand and supply for gasoline on the same set of axes. And you can do that because the price is the price and the quantity is the quantity. The thing that you just need to remember here is if you're reading the quantity off the demand curve, it's how much people want to buy, also known as the quantity demanded. If you're reading it off the supply curve, it's the quantity supplied, how much businesses want to sell. Okay, now let's do what we did before. Let's pick a price. Let's pick $1.80 right here. And the reason why I pick $1.80 instead of $1.60 is because it's actually marked on the graph. There's no magic there. I'm just picking one that you can see. Okay, so what I would say in class, I would draw this graph and I would say, okay, if the price is $1.80 per gallon, what's the situation in the market? What that means, the situation in the market, is what's the quantity demanded and what's the quantity supplied, okay? Which is bigger here at this price? Here's a real question for you. Somebody can answer.
Would it be
Please?
supply? Because there's more.
Yeah, if you go to the demand curve, you can see the demand is about 500. If you go to the supply curve, the supply is almost 700, right? And so since the quantity, you read the quantity from left to right, you can see the quantity supplied is bigger than the quantity demanded, okay? So the way we describe that is we say that's a surplus or excess supply. Those are two terms that mean exactly the same thing, right? if you think about it, businesses are supplying more than consumers want to buy. So there's going to be leftover. Okay? Keisha, you got that?
Yes.
Okay. Riley? Good. All right. Okay, so we have a situation here. Businesses have a problem. They've got a bunch of stuff they want to sell and customers aren't buying. So how do they make their inventory go away? What's the solution to the problem here?
Drop the price.
Lower
Yes,
the price.
I need a verb. The price. What does the
Lower it.
price do?
Lower.
It's going to fall. Right. What happens is, again, this isn't something that you're not familiar with. We're just using a different way of showing it. The business has a sale. They say, we're going to offer the same product, but for a lower price. Okay. So what happens is whenever you have a market and there's a surplus like this, there's going to be a tendency for the price to fall. Now, as the price goes down, two really interesting things happen. Okay. The first thing that happens is at a lower price, consumers decide they want to buy more of the product, right? So we describe that as a movement along the demand curve, right? Because the price is falling, and so consumers are reevaluating the situation and saying, well, you know, if the price was $1.80, this is how much I wanted to buy. But now that it's on sale, I'm going to take advantage of the sale and buy some more, right? A similar thing is happening on the supply side, right? As the price falls, businesses say, hey, I'm going to cut back on my orders because clearly I can't sell them all at $1.80. So at a lower price, I'm going to have less to supply, and that's a good thing also. So notice here what's happening to the surplus as the price goes down.
Getting lower.
Before it was a lot, it was this big, and now it's somewhat less than that, right? So literally what's happening is the decrease in the price is making the surplus shrink. Okay. All right. Sam, this one's for you.
Okay.
How far does the price fall?
Between what?
Well, the price starts at 180, and we said it goes down to about 160 here, right? That's the first thing.
So
Are we done?
Open anymore.
Are we done?
I mean, is that as far as the price is going to go, to 160?
No.
Why not?
Because we can see it on the graph.
Well, okay, so let me ask you this. What caused the price to fall in the first place?
Wouldn't it have to be a surplus? Isn't that what you
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So is there a surplus here?
Yes.
Yes, there is. It's a smaller surplus, but it's still a surplus. Anytime there's a surplus, the price is going to fall. So how far does the price fall? Or when does it stop falling?
You get to the 140, it's the equilibrium.
Well, yes, but what you're doing is putting a label on the answer. The answer is the price falls until the surplus goes away. When there's no surplus, the price stops falling. In other words, when the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded, then there's no then the plans of consumers and the plans of producers are exactly in sync. 140 is the only price where the amount that consumers want to buy just equals the amount that businesses want to sell. So it's a unique point. Everybody is in agreement here, okay? And because that's a special point where the price tends to stay, we call that equilibrium, right? So the way you use supply and demand graphs always is to start from an equilibrium, and then usually one of the curves will move, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And so you have to figure out, where is the new equilibrium? Is the price going to rise or fall to get to the new equilibrium? And is the equilibrium quantity going to go up or down? That's it right there. All right. So think about that for a second and let me know if you have a question. This is like, it really is like riding a bike or like scoring goals in lacrosse. How do you figure it out?
Practice.
Practice. Ashley's back.
Yeah, it's a terrible storm here, so the reception keeps walking in and out.
But Ashley, you knocked Riley out. How can that be? That's okay.
Oh, I'm still here.
Oh, okay, good. Oh, I see what the problem is. The problem is, in this format, I can only see 5 people. And so the first 5 people, the last 5 people to talk show up on my screen. So that's fine. All right. Okay, so let's go on. Suppose the price is $1. Is $1 an equilibrium price?
No,
Why not?
because now you have a shortage.
Correct. How much do people want to buy? Well, you start at $1 and you go all the way over until you hit the demand curve. That's 800 units, right? How much do businesses want to sell? Start at the price and go over until you hit the supply curve. That's 500 units. So there's a huge shortage here, right? A huge difference of opinion. So a shortage or an excess demand is the same thing, all right? So what happens to prices when there's a shortage of something?
They go up.
They go up, right? And they go up as long as there's a shortage. When the shortage goes away, the price stops rising. That means we're in equilibrium again. Okay, any questions? Checking my notes. Okay, good. All right, now, so every time you do a supply and demand problem, you're going to start with a graph like this. You're going to start in an equilibrium situation, all right? And then something is going to happen to either shift demand or shift supply, and then you need to figure out how you get from the initial equilibrium point to the new equilibrium point, okay? Graphically, it's really easy. If the supply curve shifts to here, then this is the old equilibrium and this is the new equilibrium where the 2 curves cross. X always marks the spot in supply and demand, right? But it's better if you can actually tell the story of what's going on. So let's imagine that this curve shifts over here. Then what was the equilibrium price of 140 suddenly isn't an equilibrium price anymore because the supply, the quantity supplied is going to be over here, the quantity demanded is in there, so we have a surplus again. What happens to the price when you have a surplus?
Goes down.
It goes down, right? And so the price is going to fall until we reach that new equilibrium point that we decided was here at a price of 120, okay? Or it could be a shift in demand, okay? With a shift in demand, the demand curve shifts to the right if it's an increase, or it shifts to the left if it's a decrease, because remember, the quantities go increasing from left to right. So you would work through the problem the same way. Suppose the demand curve shifted up to this point here, right? Then what you would have at the original equilibrium price is a shortage, an excess demand. The demand curve would be over here. The supply curve is still back there. That's a shortage. The price goes up until you reach the new equilibrium point. Okay, so what this means is that whenever you're trying to analyze a market, the most important thing is you have to figure out, is the demand curve shifting or is the supply curve shifting? Once you figure that out, the rest is pretty straightforward, because what's going to happen is you're going to create a shortage or you're going to create a surplus. All right. Fortunately, there are a limited number of things. Let's see if I can switch back here. There are a limited number of things that cause those curves to shift. Okay, let me see if this is the right one. Changes in supply and demand. Yeah, that's showing the demand curve shifting. Okay, one piece of language which is important, okay? When we talk about a shift in demand, it means the whole curve is shifting to the right or shifting to the left. That's a change in demand. An increase in demand is a shift to the right, a decrease in demand is a shift to the left. But oftentimes, the curve itself isn't moving. We're just moving along the curve, okay? The only thing that causes a movement along the curve is a change in the price. So a change in the price, in this case, if the price goes down, the quantity demanded is going to increase. The curve stays the same. We're just moving along the curve. Okay, now, here is an A question. This is a Morgan question. Riley? Okay. What is the only thing that would cause a movement along the demand curve?
Change in price.
That's a good answer. It's not the best answer. What would cause the price to change?
The quantity demanded.
No, that's circular. Okay. What causes them both to change?
Supply.
It's got to be a shift in the supply curve, right? Remember, there's an equilibrium. And so if the price changes and it causes the quantity to change, what's got to be happening is the other curve is shifting. So in this case, it's the supply curve that's shifting. So a movement.
So it's a shortage in like the supply of what the quantity is?
Yes.
Okay.
For example, it's not always that way, but that would be an example. Yeah. Okay. So a movement along the demand curve, either up or down, is only ever caused by a shift in the supply curve. And it goes the other way too. A movement along the supply curve is only caused by a shift in the demand curve. So that gets back to what I was talking about a few minutes ago, which is you got to figure out which curve shifts. All right. Now, no, that's not what I was hoping to see. No, don't want to do food trucks. I think what I need to do is get out of this and then go back to the table of contents. No, okay, we'll go over here. No, we'll go over here. All right. Interesting. Let's close this. All right, let me go back to demand here. Okay, factors affecting demand. Fortunately, there are a relatively limited number of things that cause these curves to shift. Okay, so for demand, since the demand curve is showing how much a consumer is willing and able to buy, what quantity a consumer is willing and able to buy, that's going to be determined in large part by their income, right? So if they get a raise, they can afford more stuff. So the demand curve is going to shift to the right. From here, it shifted out. Okay, so income is the first factor. Changing tastes or preferences. Okay, this is kind of what demand fundamentally is. You need or want something because you just do. It's, some people like pizza, other people don't like pizza. It's a question of taste, right? But if your like for something changes, then literally your demand changes. Either it increases or it decreases. Okay. Changes in the composition of the population. Yes, that's true. It's not, but more important is changes in the prices of related goods. So if Coke goes on sale, then people buy less Pepsi because it's a substitute good. Okay. If peanut butter goes on sale, people buy more jelly because peanut butter and jelly are complementary goods, right? And then finally, changes in expectations about future prices can also affect demand, right? Or changes in expectations generally. Suppose that that the National Weather Service says we're expecting tornadoes tomorrow, and we think they're going to be bad and they're likely to wipe out the power for a while. Then some people might say, now is a good time to go buy a generator while I can, right? So that's an expectation that made you act now. Okay, expectations also can operate with suppliers. Let me jump back to here. Factors affecting supply. Okay, number one, production costs. Okay, if something is more expensive to produce, then businesses are going to want to do one of two things. Either they're going to want to raise the price and maintain their profits, right? We've probably all been in a store where there was a sign up that said, I remember the last time this happened to me, it was Dunkin' Donuts, and it said, sorry, we've had to raise our prices by 15 cents per donut because the price of sugar has gone up, or something like that, right? So when some kind of production cost increases, suppliers will either want to raise the price or reduce the quantity. Okay? Both of those reflect a leftward shift in the supply curve. The supply curve shifts up and to the left in that case. A decrease in production costs goes the other way. It's a good thing from producers' point of view because they can now supply the same amount at a lower cost. And oftentimes they will pass that on to their consumers, their customers. Okay, production cost. Let's see, find another one here. Shift in supply, that one we did. Other factors that affect supply, the weather can affect the supply of agricultural products. A subsidy or a tax or a subsidy. A tax, firms interpret a tax as an increase in their cost of doing business. So it's just like an increase in production cost. It reduces their supply. A subsidy is the opposite of a tax. Okay, the government is actually paying you to do something. And so not surprisingly, a subsidy causes the supply to go up. Okay, so like in the homework problem, so here, okay, this is useful because it summarizes all of that stuff. In the homework problem that I gave you, you have three sort of cases going on. So in each of those cases, you need to figure out which curve is shifting. Where's the new equilibrium, right? And then you just work through them one by one.
Hey, Professor, do you have an easy way to remember the shift factors for both supply and demand?
No. Short answer, no. You just have to sort of memorize them. With supply, there are really 2.5 factors. There's changes in production cost and changes in technology. And the half factor is expectations can affect suppliers too, right? With demand, there are a few more. There's income, tastes and preferences, the prices of related goods like substitutes and complements, and expectations also. That's it. So it's not really a lot to remember. And as I alluded to before, when you start doing these things, you'll find it pretty easy to remember this stuff. All right. Other questions?
Where does obsolescence fall into this whole category with reduction in demand? Taste?
Well, I would call that a taste and preference change. Yeah. I have an IBM 386 computer that runs as good as the day I got it. But it's not worth anything because compared to computers today, it is absolutely obsolete. You know, so no one would want it. Heck, your guys' cell phones have more computing power than the computer that I did my doctoral research on. And that computer that I did my doctoral research on cost $52,000. You know, no, absolutely true. You know, so technology has both gotten much better, but also much cheaper. Okay, let's talk about where we are. This week, or at least I, am doing elasticity. Elasticity is a fairly technical topic, but the principle is pretty straightforward. We know, for example, the law of demand says that at a lower price, people buy more. Elasticity measures how much more people buy. Okay, so elasticity is all about measurement. Okay. So it's a fairly long module, but the idea is not that hard. People tend to get tripped up by doing the math. Fortunately, on my exams, I do most of the math for you, and it's really a question of you being able to correctly interpret what an elasticity is in a given scenario. Okay, so that's this week. Next week is consumer behavior. This is the first topic that is not part of macro, so it's part of micro. Okay. Consumer behavior is something that we're all familiar with because we're all consumers. Okay, so there is a model of consumer behavior, which is the real takeaway from that module. Okay, and the punchline here is that our first exam is 9 days from today, right? It's a week from Friday. Okay. So it's time to buckle down and get caught up if you've been lagging behind. I'm sure you guys aren't lagging behind because you're the high achievers because you're here. But there's a lot to do. What we will do at our hangout next week is I will talk about the exam, talk about what you can expect, what the layout is, how it's going to work online. And then I'll answer any questions that you have about material that might be on the exam, right? So between now and next week, you should start reviewing for that. Okay. Anybody have questions?
I do.
Yes, of course you do.
Right, shocker. So for the consumer and producer surplus,
Yes.
that whole math and like trying to read those graphs, is that going to be something that's like prevalent? Because I know.
Short answer, no.
Okay.
Long answer, it's really easy. If you just apply what we did tonight, let me see if I can show you, for example.
I know one is, I have it, but I know when I was doing the quiz, that was the one because I couldn't figure out, trying to do the customer surplus, but I couldn't.
Okay. All right. Let me try to explain it to you. All right. Let me see. Okay. So consumer surplus and producer surplus are two ways to measure something that we're all familiar with. And that is when you make a transaction, how good a deal are you getting? So when a consumer buys something, sometimes they pay exactly what they think it's worth. Sometimes they get a good deal. Sometimes they get a great deal. Okay, I'm sure you've all gotten a great deal at something before. What a great deal is simply a lot of consumer surplus. Consumer surplus is just literally a measurement of how good a deal you got. Okay, the same thing is true of producer surplus. Okay, producer surplus shows the difference between what it's costing the firm and what they get when they sell their product. In other words, producer surplus is another name for profit. Okay, so these are not things that you've never seen before. We're just looking at them and using different terms. So let me jump in here and try to show this to you. All right. Okay, here's a good graph, right? There's a supply curve. There's a demand curve, okay? There's a price, an equilibrium price of $80. All right. Now, this is a market graph. It's a market supply and a market demand curve. We can talk about two kinds of demand. The demand for some product by an individual person like you, or we can talk about the market demand, which is the demand for the same product by everybody, right? In the same way, we can talk about the supply curve of an individual firm, or we can talk about the supply curve of all the firms in the market, right? So this graph is a market graph. It shows all the consumers and it shows all the firms, okay? So think about the very first unit of output, quantity equals 1. Okay, so you see where I am down here at Q equals 1
Yeah.
in the graph? Okay, somebody thinks that unit of output is worth a lot. How much? You go up to the demand curve, and that tells you the very first unit of output is worth like maybe $150. I'm just kind of guesstimating off the graph. The height of the demand curve shows what somebody thinks that product is worth. Now, let's suppose they think it's worth $150. They only have to pay $80 for it. That's a really great deal they're getting. What is their profit on the sale? We don't usually think of it in consumer terms, but their profit would be $150 minus the 80 is $70, right? Think about this. They're getting $150 worth of item, but they're only paying 80 for it. That's a huge benefit to the consumer, okay? So the person who thinks the product is worth the most makes the greatest, or earns the greatest consumer surplus. The next person earns a little bit less because they think the product is worth a little bit less. The next person earns a little bit less. The next person earns a little bit less. So if you look at everybody who actually buys the product, the consumer surplus is the area, which is a triangle basically, that is under the demand curve, but above the equilibrium price. People pay the equilibrium price, but they receive the value shown by the demand curve, right? So if I was gonna ask you to compute consumer surplus, which I am not, it would just be a math problem. You know, what is the area under the curve and above the consumer surplus? Well, probably I would make it be an absolutely straight line demand curve, because then it's easy. It's 1/2 base times height. You can probably remember from your grade school geometry. Okay. But again, for me, what's way more important is understanding conceptually what's going on. Okay. Producer surplus works the same way, basically. The supply curve, we haven't learned this yet, but the supply curve basically reflects the cost of producing the product. Okay. So the difference between the price and the cost is the deal that the consumer makes on each item. On the first one, they make a lot. On the next one, a little bit less. On the next one, a little bit less. All the way up until the very last unit that they sell. How much consumer surplus is there on the very last unit, the 28th quantity here?
Nothing.
0, right? And there's 0 profit on the last unit too, right? But the point here is not the last unit. The point is both consumers and producers are gaining a lot by engaging in business, right? By doing these transactions. So literally, we can measure the net benefit to society of these purchases and sales as the sum of the consumer surplus and the producer surplus, right? The products themselves cost this amount, area under the supply curve, and then the rest is surplus.
That makes more sense. Thank you.
Good.
I had a question. So after a price ceiling or a price floor, it creates dead weight loss. Do we have,
Yes.
are you going to require us to calculate the consumer surplus?
No.
No.
No, I'm not going to require you to calculate much of anything.
Good. Because then it's not a triangle, so then how do you compute it?
Well, it is a triangle, actually. I mean, if you have straight line demand curves, the dead weight loss is still going to be a triangle. It's going to be over
No,
here.
but I'm saying if you, so then you would just subtract the dead weight loss from the from the social surplus?
Yes.
Okay.
But it's actually easier than that. You can calculate it directly because the dead weight loss is going to be lost consumer surplus, which is this upper triangle, lost consumer surplus, which is this lower triangle.
Right. I'm not talking about computing. I'm talking about the consumer surplus, not the dead weight loss. How do you compute that? You would just subtract the dead weight
If
loss.
you have, well, you know, I wouldn't ask you to do that if I didn't give you a straight. Well, first of all, I don't ask you to do those calculations, but it's just the area of the triangle.
Subtract the dead weight loss.
Subtracting the dead weight loss would be, suppose we stop at J for some reason, then the dead weight loss would be the area of this triangle right here. These are potential benefits to consumers and potential profit to businesses that simply don't happen because we didn't go all the way to E.
I think there was just a question on either one of the quizzes or one of the self-checks that required you to compute the consumer surplus after a price ceiling or price.
Oh, I see. So what's going to happen is then you're going to get something that's not really a triangle. It would be like, yeah. So, you know, you could do it. What I would do is I would calculate this area above and then subtract out the rectangle below. But again, this is math. This is not economics, right?
Okay.
That's why I don't care so much about that stuff. It's really more important that you understand the economics. In my opinion, and this is my opinion, it's easy and lazy for teachers to ask math problems, okay? Instead of asking problems that really try to get at, do you understand the concepts? And that's what I try to do is, do you understand the concepts and can you use them?
I agree wholeheartedly.
Same.
Well, you know, it's true. Put it another way. You could be a math major and you could do all the math and still not understand any of the economics. And that's silly, in my opinion, anyway. So, other questions?
That's my biggest one.
Okay, well, you know how to reach me, and I will see you guys next week.
All right.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
All right, Kevin.
Yeah.
Let's look at that problem. See if I can find it. Where did I put that? All right, Alice. That's nice.
I don't know if it was just a typo or what. It was just
No. Oh, here it is. Okay. So I'm looking at it.
Okay.
Let me just. Okay, it is correct, but it is not well written.
Okay.
Okay. Do you happen to have the question up there?
I do.
Okay. So the question says, given this information, 1987 had an unemployment rate of around 6%.
Yeah.
Okay. And you need to compare it to 2015.
That's it says is it harder in 1986?
No, I mean what you sent me. Okay, what you sent me says 1987, not 1986.
Well, the question here says, given this information, 1987 had an unemployment rate of around 6%.
Correct.
Look at the year 2015.
Oh,
where-
yes. So that's just, yeah. Like I said, it's a badly written question.
Huh.
So if it was 1987, 1987 has about the same unemployment rate as it does in 2015.
Well, let me finish here. It says, and compare whether it is easier or harder to find employment with 1986 and why.
Right. That should say 1987.
That's what I was getting at.
Yes.
I didn't know if I had
Yes.
something wrong.
Yeah. So I've already reported that question, and they'll fix it.
There was another one actually on the quiz that I took for elasticity. I should have wrote. I think I took a picture of it. It didn't ask for elasticity. It said one. It will be greater. So it basically asked elasticity question. However, it just all of the solutions were it will be greater or it would increase. So you're kind of left to the answer. Anyways, was 1.4%. However, I think I might have taken a picture of it, or either that or deleted it. But yeah, I deleted it because I got it right. But
Well, if you can pull it out of your trash, just send me the picture. I'd love to take a look.
okay. Yeah, it just one of the questions was just basically it didn't ask what would be greater. It just said it would be. It didn't ask what it was asking.